In this presentation, I am going to explain the function of aid and development from both a historical and contemporary perspective and the impact of the organisations involved. From the two images above, you can already see the difference between aid and development. Humanitarian aid provides short-term help that's delivered to disaster zones. Organisations respond to the incident or event and focuses on saving lives. The image on the left is taken after a disaster happens. So this is when other countries, such as UK aid, will go into the country who is in need. Developmental assistance provides long-term help that's delivered in developing countries. Organisations respond to the systematic problems and focuses in economic, social and political development of the country. The image on the right shows the development of a developing country. The Humanitarian Coalition website states that development aid can exist without humanitarian aid, but it also often exists in addition to humanitarian aid during and after a crisis. For example, if an earthquake strikes a country, short-term humanitarian aid is needed. This includes the delivery of food, water and the provision of temporary shelter as well as the health services. The origins of aid and development started with the British Empire. Collins Dictionary describes an empire as a group of people and territories, often of great extent, under the rule of a single person or sovereign state. The map above is of the British Empire and Commonwealth and shows the different colonies that were under British control in 1945. In the 16th century, Britain began to build its power, spreading the country's rule and power beyond its borders to smaller countries through imperialism, due to a desire for political and economical control over them. Collins Dictionary. This brought huge changes to societies, industries, cultures and the lives of people around the world. Nat Geo Kids. The British Empire used its wealth, armies and navy to defeat rival European countries and conquer local people. The empire mostly relied on local people to make it work, as it was a very sophisticated network of nations, people, linked by trade, by political systems and sometimes held together by force. National Archives. Colonialism is the practice of which powerful countries directly control less powerful countries as they use their resources to increase its own power and wealth. Collins Dictionary. This was the British understanding of development and developing countries that needed help. Moving on from the British Empire and on to the Cold War, the Velvet Glove was significant to aid and development as it provided a cultural bond between colonised and colonising. Britain relied on the velvet glove of cultural imperialism, and to the end of the Victorian period, sport had come to play an important role in this regard. As Holt 1990 notes, sports were thought to help create a climate of relations that would bind empires together. The Marshall Plan was an example of a strategic political development of those in power. It was a US programme providing aid to Western Europe following the devastation of World War II. It was enacted in 1948 and provided more than $15 billion to help finance rebuilding efforts on the continent. It was a 4-year plan to construct cities, industries and infrastructure heavily damaged during the war and remove trade barriers between European nations. History.com. The US hoped that the Marshall Plan would result in prevention of the spread of communism, as they didn't want the USSR, Russia, to gain control over Europe due to being threatened that communists would undermine the USA. They hoped that the Marshall Plan would give them some influence in being able to manipulate in Europe. Therefore, aid and development was used as economic, political and social alignment to the USA values. This leads us on to present day in neo-colonialism. This is the country is under political control by an outside power of a country that is in theory sovereign and independent, especially through the domination of its economy. Collins Dictionary. This can be defined as a new type of colonialism, as large, more powerful countries have economic influence over the developing ones. The image above is of Africa. It shows that different countries and what they produce. For example, there are a lot of interest from China and a lot of Chinese in Zambia due to them discovering and selling lots of copper. This is then shipped back to China and used to create things such as phones. The United Nations Millennium Declaration, signed in September 2000, commits world leaders to combat poverty, hunger, disease, illiteracy, environmental degeneration and discrimination against women. The MDGs are derived from this declaration. Each MDG has set targets for 2015 and indicators to monitor progress from 1990. Several of these are related directly to health. The WHO. The MDGs helped lift millions of people out of poverty, empower women and girls, improve health and well-being and provide vast new opportunities for better lives. Ban Ki-moon mentioned in the UN report into the MDG's success that following profound and constant gains, we now know that extreme poverty has been eradicated with one or more generation. The MDGs have greatly contributed to this progress and have taught us how governments, business and civil society can work together to achieve transformation breakthrough. UN report. Therefore, in 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals were created to build on the MDGs. The UN's SDGs are 17 goals with 169 targets that all UN member states have agreed to work towards and achieve by the year 2030. The UN Foundation suggests that they are the World Shared Plan to End Extreme Poverty, Reduce Inequality and Protect the Planet, UN Foundation 2015. Adopted by 193 countries, the SDGs emerged from the most inclusive and comprehensive negotiations in the UN history and inspired people from across sectors, geographies and cultures. Achieving the goals by 2030 will remain a heroic and imaginative effort, determination and learn about what works and agility to adapt the new information and changing trends. The UN Foundation focuses on ideas and initiatives that generate larger impact, advance the SDGs imperative to leave no one behind and are backed by evidence, practical commitments and action. UN Foundation 2015. The SDGs aim to be relevant to all countries, poor, rich and middle income, to promote prosperity while protecting the environment and tackling climate change. They have strong focus on improving inequality to meet the needs of women, children and disadvantaged populations in particular, so that no one is left behind. The WHO. Governmental organisations are government-appointed groups that are funded and run by the government. The examples on the screen all deliver aid to developing countries. There are many benefits to GOs helping countries such as knowledge, control and money. However, a potential issue is conflicting ideologies between other organisations, and poor management and staff incentives are often amongst the causes of so-called state failure. An example of a GO is Australia Aid. They provide for Australia's official development assistance to developing countries. Their main objective is to help people overcome poverty, which serves Australia's national interest by promoting stability and prosperity, both in the near region and beyond, with priorities being in health and education, gender equality, agriculture and economic development, so developing countries can trade and compete with the international market. IGOs are organisations that are funded and run by two or more nations that work in good faith on issues of a common interest. The examples on the screen are all collaborative organisations that deliver aid to developing countries. An example of an IGO is the UN, which was created at the end of World War II as the nations were in ruins and wanted peace. Representatives from 50 countries gathered at a conference in San Francisco, and for the next 2 months they proceeded to draft and then signed the UN Charter, which created the new international organisation, which it was hoped would prevent another world war like the one they'd just lived through. The UN have many other organisations that work for them, for example UNICEF, which makes sure children are on the global agenda. UNICEF work in over 190 countries to save children's lives, defend their rights, keep them safe from harm and develop and fulfil their potential from an early age through to adolescence. NGOs are voluntary groups of individuals or organisations, usually not affiliated by any government, that is formed to provide services to advocate the public policy. CARMS 2018. Vakova and Sukova suggested that both benefits and risks to NGOs, risk being business risk, risks of conflict within the organisation's mission, and the risk of organisation and professional unpreparedness when self-financing. However, the conclusion was made that the benefits outweigh the risk. An example of an NGO is Oxfam, who created a global movement of millions of people who shared the belief that in a world rich in resources, poverty isn't inevitable. In 15 years, extreme poverty has been hard. For every £1 donated, 84% is spent on fighting poverty, 9% on vital support costs and 7% goes towards raising the next £1. This highlights how donations help the NGO to respond quickly to emergencies around the world, help people to work themselves out of poverty and campaign to change things that keep people poor. In my next presentation, I will explain how sport has an impact on development and aid.